Go.
Hello everyone, I'm David Byers. Welcome to my channel. I am a wood turner. If it will spin on a lathe and I can shape it, that's what I like to play with. I like to take these unusual pieces of wood like you see before you here with this piece of red maple, and I like to shape them to fit into a mold. We're going to use a 5-gallon bucket this week, and then I add epoxy resin pigmented with mica powder. We're going to use Duo Violet Brass this week, and we're going to create unusual creations. This week, my goal is to make a tall bowl, and using this piece of wood, this is a lot more wood than what's ever going to fit into this bucket. I could almost go sideways with it and do it in grain. It doesn't fit my bandsaw. My bandsaw is not going to cut something that's about 7.5 inches high, which this one is. So I'm going to have to shape it with my chainsaw to get to this point. So anyway, it's going to be a fun project this week. I'm going to pull you in here closer so you can see how I'm going to measure to start cutting with my chainsaw and get things to fit. When I pull you in closer, you'll be able to see the character of the wood better as we're getting started. Then I'm going to have to clean the wood up because there's still a lot of loose debris. I'm going to have to take my wire wheel to it, but that'll be easier after we get it cut and fitted to the bucket. So hey, let's do this week. And once again, I hope you guys like what we're doing. Pop me that thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so you can continue to see what we're doing here in the future. So let's get started. Come on in closer. So as we are looking at this piece of wood, it's got some great character to it. You just can't go wrong with maple. Maple's just always so pretty. So anyway, what I'm looking at wanting to capture, I love this where this limb used to be and then the tree healed itself, and we've got this edge and we've got all these little unusual areas that was up underneath the bark as we cleared it out. And then on the inside, from the hollow section of the tree, we've got all this unusualness also. And I don't know if you can see, but do you see right here these little mud pockets? I do believe in the end of the last video that we just did with the American Dream, I mentioned that as I was cleaning this piece of wood that I found a big black widow spider, and I think that might have been from the black widow spider. I don't know, but there's still a little bit of cleanup that I need to do with this. So for me to keep this, there's a balancing act that I'm trying to play with the epoxy pigmented with the violet brass color. I want this to be the outer edge, but I want to have some translucency with the epoxy so that we can see this unusual character coming through. So I have to balance how I'm going to get it to fit to the bucket so that I have some epoxy and some wood showing through the epoxy. So as I look at how it's shaped with this edge coming in through here and this outer edge, if I'm measuring the top of the bucket like so, that gives me a comparison for how much is going to be captured on the inside. So that's what I'm trying to do. I want to have a little bit of extra here, and as I'm turning it around so I can see, I want to have a little bit of extra here. So I'm going to mark the bucket on this piece of wood with my Sharpie, and actually I'm losing a little bit on that edge. I'm gonna need to increase a little bit more from this side. I'm gonna need to lose a little bit more over here as I'm marking. So I'm gonna draw this, and the cuts that I will make, that will definitely create some character doing it like so. That'll put this on the inside, and it's gonna be unusual to say the least. So I'm gonna go make some cuts with my chainsaw. After I cut it with a chainsaw, I can clean off this other edge. This one is relatively thin, so that should cut out pretty clean, pretty easy. So let's go make these cuts. Then I'll bring it in. I'll show you what we've got, and we will see how it fits to the bucket. So look at what we got here. Got everything cut with the chainsaw, so it shaped it out. We were able to keep this area that I was talking about, and then, like I said, it wouldn't fit my bandsaw. So instead, after cutting it with a chainsaw, getting close to the marks that I had originally made, I left a little chainsaw mark there. I left a couple there, but I came back and I cleaned it up with my belt sander, which is a 6-inch belt sander. So, I mean, that was tedious, took a little bit of time. Didn't waste the video footage because that would have been boring for you guys to look at, but it shaped it pretty well. We're going to have some really outstanding character that's going to show up with this piece. I can't wait to see what this looks like. And it fits the bucket just the way that I want it to. You know, you can't beat Harbor Freight for a bucket. They're inexpensive. They have a good flat bottom as opposed to being wavy and all kinds of different shapes. But anyway, let's get some epoxy poured up. I think this is going to be fantastic. We're going to run this one through the vacuum chamber and then let it sit in the pressure pot at 60 pounds of pressure, or close to 60 pounds of pressure, for a good 3 days. So let's get her done. Let's get all of this pigment mixed in. You want to make sure that you get a good thorough mix. You want to make sure that all of the part A and part B incorporate together. Anything that's not thoroughly mixed is going to be unset areas with the final product. So we're adding, to begin with, 3 liters of epoxy. That was not enough, so we're going to add another 1.5 liters of epoxy. And then placing this weight on top to see how it sets, decided to mix up another 1.5 liters. And I thought this was going to be a little bit too much. I poured just to see what kind of coverage we would have. There was a couple of places that were still just not quite covered, so I added a little bit more. And then, as you'll see here, I'm going to have just a little bit of epoxy that's left over. It's always good to plan ahead. This last little bit of epoxy, that's going to be some wine stoppers. I left the footage of this clip just for one reason. I want you to see here that as I pick this up, which is slippery, and I start to walk, I trip. That would have been a bad day if I had dropped it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what's going on here. So you saw I centered in this this block of wood and epoxy, and then I used a Forstner bit to grind through the epoxy down to the wood layer, and then I hammered in my live spur center, attached it to the headstock, and then brought in the tailstock so that I can true this in a little bit before attaching my waste block. Now, I don't always do things like this, but I thought this would be a good video to demonstrate how you can do this if you want to. What I'm doing now is I'm initial truing things in. I'm going to have to come back and do this again later after I do attach the waste block, but I want things to be as true as within reason, as true as can be before I attach the waste block. So I'm going to do this on the periphery, and then I'm going to come back on the tailstock side, and I'm going to remove epoxy down to the wood layer and fix it up so that we can attach a nice strong waste block to it. Not going to show all this footage, just wanted to catch you up and let you see what we were doing, and then after we get the waste block connected, then we can start shaping it out and figure out what the final dimensions of this bowl will be. So here I have skipped to the final stages of initial truing this in so we can get the waste block connected. You can see here it's not completely true, but it's close enough. So now we can come back and we can make the bottom perfectly flat so we can attach a good waste block to it with the hot melt glue. Hear this sound though, hear the chatter. That chatter tells you that things are not true and you're going to have pieces flying off. So goggles are not enough. You need to have a strong face shield when you're wearing this because you never know what's going to fly up towards your face, and you need to be well protected. So going to show a little bit more of this footage. We're going to flatten things out, then we're going to connect this waste block, and then we can really start shaping out the final design of the bowl. Alright, just a little update here. So I have finished hollowing out this piece. I made the opening wide enough so I can actually place my hand on the inside. And at this point, I'm going to sand at 60 grit sandpaper and just smooth up the inside a little bit. I made it as smooth as I could with the tools as I was hollowing it, but there's always some chatter. There's some pull out. So I'm going to sand it to 60 grit, and then here you see I'm going to, well, let's look on the inside. You can see the little chatter places that I'm talking about. So I'm going to do a thin pour of some fast set epoxy. I'm going to lightly tint it with the same color of mica powder, and then I'm just going to smoothly rub it in and get a nice thin layer to fill in those little areas, and then I'll come back and I will sand the entire piece. It is a nice little technique to make sure that it's as smooth as possible because we want it to be perfect everywhere. Okay, so let's close this video out. This is, guys, if you can't get excited about a piece when it turns out like this, then you just can't get excited about wood turning with epoxy. So with this piece, I want to show you, I could not be more pleased with this purple color and the bronze that's mixed in with it. But the piece of maple, you know, it all starts with the wood, and the wood is the basis of each piece. The epoxy is an accent to the wood, but of course sometimes we do get carried away. If you remember, when we had the original piece of wood, we had the area where a limb used to be, and it was a little bit flat with a rounded edge. That is this area. And then as we come over to here, this was the inside portion of the wood that has all filled in with epoxy. The, the character in the piece of maple itself is fantastic, and the epoxy could not accent it any better than what it does. I just could not be more pleased with this. I love the shape. I love the color. I love the character. So with this piece, this one is my tribute to Prince. We are naming this piece Purple Rain, and I'm going to show you. We're spelling rain R-E-I-G-N, so Purple Rain, because this looks to me regal. It looks like a monarch's crown, so to speak. But once again, I could not be more pleased with how this turns out. I wanted to show you the dimensions on this one. This one is 9.5 inches wide, 6 1/8 inch tall, and the thickness, I kept it at 1 inch thick all the way through just because the epoxy looks so great. And you know, this just is not doing it justice. Follow me. We're going to take this piece outside. I want you to see, even on this windy day in Georgia that I have, I want you to see what the sun does to this duo colored resin with the purple and the bronze mixed in. So come on outside with me. Here we go. Like I said, this piece, you have to see it in the sun to do it justice. The sun just wakes the epoxy up. It's gorgeous. I love this piece. What a tribute. So once again, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video as much as I've enjoyed making it. The wind is blowing, so I'm afraid the camera is going to blow over again. It's bounced off the ground twice already. But hey, give me a thumbs up. I hope you enjoyed this video. This one has been my pleasure to create. I'll see you again soon with the next one. Thanks, guys.